In the 5th century AD, as the Roman world struggled under the weight of corruption, division, and endless war, a new terror rose from the vast Eurasian steppes. His name alone sent fear across Europe. Cities trembled, emperors paid tribute, and entire nations fled before his armies. Roman writers would later call him flagellum, the scourge of God. History remembers him as Attila the Hun. To some, Attila was a barbarian warlord who brought destruction wherever he rode. To others, he was a brilliant strategist who exploited the weakness of collapsing empires. But behind the legend lies a complex figure shaped by the brutal realities of the ancient world. Attila did not rise from a civilized capital or a marble palace. He emerged from the endless grasslands north of the Black Sea, where survival depended on strength, mobility, and discipline. The Huns were nomadic warriors, masters of horseback warfare, unmatched in speed and psychological terror. Their origins remain partially mysterious. Most historians believe the Huns migrated westward from Central Asia, pushed by climate shifts, population pressure, or conflicts with other nomadic groups. As they moved, they displaced Germanic tribes, triggering a chain reaction that destabilized the Roman frontier. By the early 5th century, the Huns had become a dominant force in Eastern Europe. Attila was born around 406 AD into the ruling elite of the Huns. His uncle, Rua, was king of the Hunnic Confederation and maintained a delicate balance between war and diplomacy with the Romang Empire. Rome often paid the Huns in gold to keep the peace a sign not of Hunnic weakness, but Roman fear. After Rua's death in 434 AD, power passed to Attila and his brother Bleda. Together, they ruled the Huns as co-kings. This arrangement was temporary. In a world built on absolute authority, shared power rarely survived long. Within a decade, Bleda was dead, likely murdered on Attila's orders. From that moment onward, Attila ruled alone. Unlike many barbarian leaders, Attila was not reckless. He understood Roman politics, Roman weakness, and Roman greed. He used diplomacy as effectively as violence, extracting massive tributes from the Eastern Romang Empire. In 435 AD, Attila forced the Romans to sign the Treaty of Margus. Rome agreed to double its annual payments of gold and return all Hunnic defectors. This treaty was humiliating, but Rome accepted it because Rome had little choice. Yet peace never lasted. By 441 AD, Attila launched a devastating campaign into the Balkans. His armies crossed the Danube and swept through Roman territory with terrifying efficiency. Cities such as Naissus and Serdica were destroyed. Roman defenses collapsed. The Eastern Roman Empire, centered in Constantinople, was rich but militarily strained. While its walls protected the capital, the countryside burned. Attila understood siege warfare better than his enemies expected. The Huns were no longer just horse archers. They employed engineers, siege towers, and captured Roman technology. This adaptability made Attila far more dangerous than earlier nomadic leaders. By 443 AD, Attila stood at the gates of Constantinople itself. Only the massive Theodosian walls prevented total catastrophe. Even so, the emperor had no option but surrender through diplomacy. Rome paid more gold. By now, Attila controlled an empire stretching from the Rhine to the Volga. But conquest alone did not satisfy him. He wanted recognition. He wanted legitimacy. He wanted Rome to acknowledge him not as a barbarian, but as an equal. The Western Roman Empire, weaker and more fractured than its eastern counterpart, soon became Attila's next target. In 450 AD, an extraordinary event changed the course of history. Honoria, the sister of Western Roman Emperor Valentinian III, secretly sent Attila a ring and a plea for help. Whether she sought marriage or political rescue remains debated, but Attila interpreted it as a marriage proposal. He demanded half of the Western Roman Empire as her dowry. Rome refused. War became inevitable. In 451 AD, Attila invaded Gaul with one of the largest armies Europe had ever seen. Huns, Gepids, Ostrogoths, and other subject peoples marched together under his banner. Cities fell one after another. Metz burned. Paris narrowly survived. But Rome was not alone. A Roman general named Flavius Idius forged an unlikely alliance with former enemies Visigoths, Franks, and Burgundians. Together, they confronted Attila on the Catalonian plains. What followed was one of the bloodiest battles of antiquity. The Battle of the Catalonian Plains was not a clear victory for either side, but it stopped Attila's advance. Tens of thousands lay dead. The Visigothic king Theodoric was killed. Attila retreated, but he was not defeated. The following year, Attila invaded Italy itself. Northern cities fell rapidly. Aquileia was completely destroyed so thoroughly that it nearly vanished from history. Refugees fled into the marshes, laying the foundations for what would later become Venice. Rome itself stood vulnerable. Then, something extraordinary happened. In 452 AD, Pope Leo I met Attila in person. What was said remains unknown. Some say gold was offered. Others claim disease, famine, and strategic calculation forced Attila's withdrawal. Christian tradition would later describe a divine vision warning Attila away. Whatever the reason, Attila turned back. It was the last campaign of his life. In 453 AD, Attila died suddenly on his wedding night. According to legend, he suffered a massive nosebleed and choked in his sleep. Others suspect assassination. His death was as mysterious as his life. Without Attila, the Hunnic Empire collapsed almost immediately. His sons fought among themselves. Subject tribes rebelled. Within a generation, the Huns vanished from history as a unified power. But Attila's impact endured. He accelerated the fall of the Western Roman Empire. He reshaped Europe's ethnic map. He became a symbol of apocalypse, fear, and unstoppable force. Yet modern historians see something more nuanced. Attila was not a destroyer without purpose. He was a product of Roman decline. His success depended on Rome's internal decay. Corruption, political instability, and economic collapse opened the door for conquest. In many ways, Attila did not destroy Rome. Rome destroyed itself. And Attila merely rode through the ruins. The Roman world had faced enemies for centuries, but nothing prepared it for the psychological terror unleashed by the Huns. They did not march in orderly formations like Roman legions, nor did they build cities or lay long sieges like civilized empires. They appeared suddenly, struck with devastating speed, and vanished just as quickly. To the settled peoples of Europe, the Huns felt less like an army and more like a natural disaster. By the early 5th century, the Huns had transformed from scattered nomadic bands into a centralized military power. This transformation was driven by leadership, organization, and one man above all others, Attila. Attila was not born a conqueror of legend. He inherited power in a world already reshaped by Hunnic pressure. The Roman Empire, split into eastern and western halves, had been paying tribute to the Huns for decades. Gold flowed north across the Danube, not as diplomacy, but as protection money. Rome no longer dictated terms, it reacted. Attila and his brother Bleda ruled jointly at first. Together, they forced the Eastern Roman Empire into humiliating treaties. Cities were stripped of defenses, borderlands abandoned, and Roman diplomats spoke from fear rather than authority. When Bleda died, likely murdered, Attila became sole ruler, and the Hunnic war machine reached its peak. Under Attila, the Huns became something unprecedented, a nomadic empire capable of strategic planning. Their strength lay in mobility. Mounted archers trained from childhood could fire accurately at full gallop, striking from distances Roman infantry could not match. They avoided direct confrontation unless victory was certain. Instead, they exhausted enemies through raids, terror, and psychological warfare. Cities across the Balkans burned. Naissus, once a Roman stronghold, was reduced to ruins littered with bones. Survivors described fields filled with corpses, rivers choked with the dead. Roman chroniclers struggled to describe the devastation, often turning to religious language, calling the Huns divine punishment. The Eastern Roman Empire survived only because it could pay. The West could not. Western Rome was already collapsing under internal decay, political chaos, economic decline, and reliance on barbarian mercenaries. When Attila turned his gaze westward, there was little left to resist him. In 451 CE, Attila invaded Gaul. His army was not purely Hunnic. It was a coalition of subject peoples: Gepids, Ostrogoths, Alans, all bound by fear and ambition. Cities fell one after another. Metz burned. Paris survived only because Attila chose not to besiege it. The Roman response came under an unlikely leader, Flavius Aetius, a general who had once lived among the Huns as a hostage. He understood their tactics, their psychology, and their weaknesses. Aetius forged an alliance of former enemies, Romans, Visigoths, Franks, and confronted Attila at the Catalonian plains. The battle that followed was one of the largest and bloodiest of late antiquity. It was not a clear Roman victory, but it stopped Attila's advance. For the first time, the scourge of God had been checked. Yet Attila was not defeated. The following year, he invaded Italy. Northern cities collapsed with little resistance. Aquileia was obliterated, so completely that survivors later claimed even its location was forgotten. Refugees fled into the lagoons of the Adriatic, laying the foundations for what would one day become Venice. Rome itself lay exposed. What stopped Attila remains one of history's enduring mysteries. A Roman embassy led by Pope Leo I met Attila. No record survives of what was said. Soon after, Attila withdrew. Some say disease, famine, or logistical limits forced his retreat. Others believe superstition played a role, that Attila feared Rome's spiritual power. Whatever the reason, Rome was spared, but not saved. In 453 CE, Attila died suddenly on his wedding night, possibly from internal bleeding. Without his authority, the Hunnic Empire collapsed almost overnight. Subject peoples revolted. At the Battle of Nadao, the Huns were decisively defeated by their former allies. The Huns did not disappear completely, but their moment had passed. Yet their impact was permanent. They had triggered mass migrations that reshaped Europe. Gothic, Vandal, and other barbarian invasions were direct consequences of Hunnic pressure from the east. The Western Roman Empire, already fragile, could not survive this chain reaction. Within 2 decades of Attila's death, the last Western Roman emperor was deposed. The Huns did not conquer Rome, but they broke the world that sustained it. Historically, the Huns represent a turning point. They exposed the vulnerability of classical civilization to mobile warfare. They demonstrated that empires built on bureaucracy and infrastructure could be undone by speed, adaptability, and fear. They also remind us that history is not always shaped by builders and lawmakers. Sometimes it is shaped by writers emerging from the horizon, carrying no written laws, no monuments, and no intention of ruling, only of dominating the moment. Attila's empire vanished, but the shockwaves of his campaigns defined the Femvi transition from the ancient world to the medieval one. Europe after the Huns was not Rome's Europe. It was fragmented, militarized, and forever changed. And that is the true legacy of the Hunnic invasions, not an empire that lasted, but a world that could never return to what it once was.